I was standing in front of Greater Hope Baptist Church when my own son looked me up and down, stared at my worn-out shoes, and said in front of 300 people, "You look like a beggar. Get out of here right now." At that moment, while security dragged me toward the street, he didn't know that in the inside pocket of my jacket, I carried the transfer documents for the new car I had bought to gift him. He also didn't know how much that humiliation would cost me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because we have new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments from which city you are watching us. My name is Andre Williams Sr. I'm 67 years old, and over the last 8 decades, I have learned that life gives you lessons when you least expect them. But I never imagined the most painful lesson would come from my own son on his wedding day. To understand what happened that Saturday, September 23rd, 2024, I need to tell you how we got there. My wife, Denise Walker, passed away 8 years ago from a cancer that consumed our savings and our souls. I was widowed at 59 with a 24-year-old son who had just finished his business administration degree. Denise was always the center of our family, the peacemaker, the one who knew exactly what to say when Marcus and I disagreed. Without her, our relationship changed. Marcus was our only child. We raised him with love, but also with discipline. Denise worked as a nurse at the University of Chicago Medical Center, and I was an electrical technician for an industrial maintenance company. We weren't rich, but we didn't lack anything either. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom apartment in Bronzeville. We paid our bills on time and occasionally allowed ourselves a vacation on the coast. When Denise got sick in 2016, everything changed. The experimental treatments weren't covered by our public plan. We sold the car, a 2010 Ford Focus, that worked perfectly. We took out loans. I worked double shifts whenever I could. I'd get home after midnight to find Denise asleep on the sofa because she could no longer climb the stairs to our bedroom. Marcus was finishing college then, and we decided he shouldn't quit. His mother insisted on that with her last breath. Denise died on a Tuesday in April, surrounded by flowers Marcus had bought with his first paycheck from a part-time job. It was the last beautiful thing I remember of my son being truly my son. After the funeral, something in him changed, or maybe something in me broke and I could no longer see him the same way. The following years were hard. Marcus got a job at a logistics company. Nothing spectacular, but with good pay. He moved to a shared apartment in Hyde Park. We saw each other less and less. Phone calls became infrequent. Visits were reduced to birthdays and obligatory Christmases, where he arrived late and left early. I kept working, paying the debts we had taken on during Denise's illness. I lived austerely, learned to cook simple meals. I stopped going out with friends. I canceled cable. My life shrank to working, paying debts, and sleeping. But I didn't complain. It was what I had to do. In 2019, 3 years after Denise's death, Marcus called to tell me he had met someone. Her name was Patrice Sutton. She worked in digital marketing and came from an upper-middle-class family in Oak Park. I was happy for him. Truly. I thought maybe that would make him happy again, that I'd get back the son who laughed easily and called me every Sunday just to ask how I was. I met Patrice 6 months after they started dating. It was at an awkward dinner in an Italian restaurant near the Gold Coast. She was polite but distant. She asked courteous questions about my work, but glanced at her phone every few minutes. Marcus seemed nervous, as if he were waiting for my approval, and fearing my opinion at the same time. I said nothing negative. What could I say? She was the woman my son had chosen. 2 years later, in March 2021, Marcus called to announce his engagement. Patrice had said yes. They would marry in September 2024. They wanted a big wedding, something memorable. He asked if I could help with the expenses. I told him I'd do what I could. What I didn't say was how much that would mean for me. My debts were finally paid off. For the first time in years, I had a little financial breathing room and decided I would use every euro I could save to give my son the wedding he deserved. It was what Denise would have wanted. Over the next 3 years, I worked every available overtime hour. I refused repairs in my apartment. My shoes wore down until the soles began to separate. But I didn't buy new ones. My clothes went out of style. My pants grew shiny from use, but it didn't matter. No one saw me, except at work. And I started saving for something else. A special gift. Something that would show Marcus how much I loved him. How much I had sacrificed. How much it meant to me to see him happy. But that part of the story will have to wait. Because first you need to understand what happened that Saturday, September 23rd, when I arrived at Greater Hope Baptist Church, dressed in my best suit and my only shoes. The morning of September 23rd, 2024, dawned clear over Chicago. I got up at 6, as always, even though it was Saturday, and I didn't have to work. Nerves hadn't let me sleep more than 4 hours. It was Marcus's wedding day, and I had been preparing myself mentally for that moment for weeks. I showered in cold water because the heater had been failing for months, and I hadn't wanted to spend money to repair it. I shaved carefully in the fogged bathroom mirror, using the same razor Denise had given me 20 years earlier. I slicked my hair back with cheap gel I bought at the corner grocery store. Every gesture was deliberate, trying to look my best with the limited resources I had. I took my only suit from the closet, a dark gray set I had bought in 2010 for my father's funeral. I had brushed it the night before, trying to lift the lint and give it some life. The tie was burgundy, a little outdated, but clean. The white shirt had a slightly yellowed collar, despite washing it 3 times with bleach. I did the best I could. Then it was time for the shoes. My only formal shoes were black leather I had bought in 2008. 16 years of use had left their mark. The soles were worn, the leather cracked in several places. One lace was a replacement because the original had snapped months ago. I had polished them until my arms ached, but there was no shine in the world that could hide their age. I thought about buying new shoes. I had considered spending 60 or 70 euros for weeks, but whenever I did, I remembered the envelope in my nightstand drawer, the envelope that held something far more important than my appearance. I put on the full suit and looked at myself in the full-length mirror hanging on my bedroom door. I looked exactly like what I was, an older man doing his best with what he had. Not elegant, but dignified, or so I believed. Before leaving, I opened the drawer and took out the thick manila envelope. Inside were the transfer documents for the Mercedes C-Class I had bought for Marcus. Silver gray, style trim, 95 horsepower equivalent, 5 doors, 21,500 euros I had saved over 5 years, 300 euros a month, every month without fail. To free those 300 euros monthly, I made sacrifices Marcus never knew. I canceled my home internet and used the free Wi-Fi at the public library. I stopped buying meat, except occasionally, living mainly on lentils, rice, and cheap vegetables from the market. I didn't turn on the heat in winter, using heavy blankets and sweaters in the apartment. I walked 40 minutes to work instead of taking the train, saving 60 euros a month on transportation. Every sacrifice was worth it when I imagined Marcus's face receiving the keys. I planned to announce it during the reception after the first dance, when everyone would be relaxed and happy. It would be my surprise gift, the ultimate demonstration that even if I didn't have much, I would give everything for my son. I tucked the envelope carefully into my inside jacket pocket. It weighed little, but it felt as if I were carrying something precious, something that would change everything. I triple-checked that it was secure before leaving. I took the train to the 63rd Street station. Greater Hope Baptist Church was a 15-minute walk from there. I arrived an hour early. I wanted to be present, help if needed, show my support. Some guests had already begun to arrive, women in elegant dresses, and men in suits that clearly cost more than my monthly salary. I stood near the entrance, greeting politely those I recognized. Most were friends of Patrice or her family, whom I had never met. Few knew I existed. Marcus had shared little about me in recent years. That much was obvious from the puzzled looks when I introduced myself as the father of the groom. I saw Jerome Carter, my only close friend who had been invited. Jerome and I had known each other for 40 years. We had worked at the same company for decades before he retired. He greeted me with a strong hug. "Andre, you look good," he lied kindly, though his eyes showed concern as they took in my worn outfit. "Thanks for coming, Jerome. It means a lot to have someone familiar here. Wouldn't miss it. How are you holding up?" "Nervous, a little. It's an important day." Jerome noticed my shoes but said nothing. Too polite for that. He simply nodded and patted my shoulder before going inside to find a seat. More guests arrived. The parking lot filled with expensive cars, Audis, Mercedes, even a BMW 7 Series I recognized as belonging to Edward Sutton, Patrice's father. Everyone looked prosperous, confident, comfortable in their wealth. I was clearly the discordant note in that landscape of abundance. Finally, the moment to enter came. The bells began to ring. Guests made their way to their seats. I waited near the door, wanting to slip in later so as not to draw attention. But then I saw Marcus. He stood in the church atrium, impeccable in his rented black tuxedo, hair perfectly styled, shoes gleaming, pocket square folded with millimetric precision. He looked like a stranger, like someone I didn't know. When our eyes met, something changed in his expression. I walked toward him with a smile, arms open for a fatherly hug. Marcus didn't move. His eyes dropped slowly from my face to my shoes. He stared at them for what felt like an eternity. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared. Then he spoke the words that would change everything between us forever. "Dad, what the hell do you have on your feet? You look like a beggar." Marcus's words hit like punches. I froze, unable to process what I had just heard. Around us, guests kept filing into the church, oblivious to what was happening in that corner of the atrium, though some began to stop, to look, drawn by the aggressive tone in my son's voice. "Marcus, I tried to explain, but he cut me off immediately. "No, Dad, I don't care about your excuses. This is my day, the most important day of my life, and you show up dressed like you just walked out of a homeless shelter." His voice rose in volume. More heads turned our way. Heat climbed my neck. Humiliation settled in my chest, like a physical weight. I looked at my shoes, seeing what he saw: cracked leather, worn soles, mismatched as laces. But they were my only formal shoes. They were the best I had. "Son, I didn't have money for new shoes. I've been saving." "Saving for what? To make a fool of me at my wedding?" He was almost shouting now. "Do you know how much it cost to rent this church? Do you know who's here? Patrice's boss, her business partners, important people, and you show up looking like that." At that moment, Patrice appeared, radiant in her white wedding dress, veil not yet lowered over her face. She approached Marcus with a smile that froze when she saw the scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking me up and down with an expression of barely disguised confusion and disgust. "My father decided to show up like a vagrant," Marcus said bitterly. "Look at his shoes, Patrice. Really look at them." She glanced down. Her nose wrinkled slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it perfectly. In her eyes, I saw the same judgment, the same shame emanating from Marcus. To her, I wasn't the father of her future husband. I was a problem, a stain on her perfect day. "Marcus, honey, maybe we can—" Patrice began, but Marcus cut her off. "No, this is unacceptable. I gave him a month's notice, an entire month, to get ready. And this is what he does." I tried to recover some dignity. "Son, understand, the money's been tight. I paid—" "I don't care," he snapped. "You always have excuses. You've always been like this, poor and complaining, making everyone feel guilty for having something better." Those words shattered me more than all the others combined. Her words cut deeper than I expected. Poor and complaining. I, who had worked double shifts to pay for his college textbooks, who had sold my car for his mother's treatments, who had spent 5 years saving every cent possible to buy him a gift that still sat in the pocket of my jacket as proof of my love, now labeled as nothing more than a burden. "Marcus, please," I said quietly, hating the pleading tone in my own voice. "It's your wedding. I'm your father. Let me be here." "A real father," he said coldly, "would care enough not to embarrass his son." By then, several guests had gathered around, forming a semicircle. I heard murmurs, saw phones lifted discreetly to record. This humiliation was no longer private. It was about to become gossip shared over dinners and messages. Still, what hurt most was the look of pure contempt on my only son's face. "I need you to leave," Marcus finally said, his voice low but firm. "I don't want you inside that church, not during the ceremony, not ruining the photos with that look." "You can't be serious," I whispered. "I'm completely serious. Leave, now." I clung to one last thread of hope. "I helped pay for this wedding, son. I contributed." "Contributed? What, a few $100s?" he snapped. "This wedding cost $40,000, Dad. What you gave is nothing compared to what Patrice and her family have put in." 40,000. 15,000 of those had come from my account, paid in careful installments over 6 months. The catering, 5,000. Flowers and decorations, 3,500. The band, 2,000. The photographer, 1,800. The cake, 800. Special tableware, 900. Invitations, 400. Every transfer documented, every receipt stored neatly in a folder at home. But Marcus didn't know any of it. He had no idea that his insignificant contribution had nearly drained the small savings I had rebuilt after years of debt. I hadn't told him because I wanted it to be a surprise, another gesture of love that would show him how proud I was. "Please," I tried one last time, feeling tears rising. "Let me at least watch your ceremony. I'll sit in the back. I won't disturb anyone." He made a subtle motion with his hand. 2 men in black suits appeared beside me. Private security. I recognized their stance, professional and detached. Patrice had insisted on hiring them, something I thought was unnecessary when Marcus mentioned it weeks ago. Now I understood why. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of them said, gripping my arm gently but firmly. "I'm the father of the groom," I protested weakly. "I have the right to be here." Marcus stepped closer, his face inches from mine. In his eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Hatred. Cold, crystalline hatred. "You have no right here anymore," he said. "Get out!" The guards tightened their grip. I didn't resist. They led me out, my feet dragging slightly against the polished floor. Around us, the murmurs grew louder. Some guests looked away in discomfort. Others stared with morbid curiosity. Most simply didn't care. Outside, they released me on the sidewalk in front of the church. One of them muttered a half-hearted apology before turning back inside. I stood there, stunned, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The heavy church doors closed with a sound that echoed like the lid of a coffin. I staggered to a stone bench across the street and sat down heavily, feeling every one of my 67 years in my bones. Around me, life went on as if nothing had happened. Cars passing, people walking, the sun shining with that cruel indifference the universe always shows toward unpersonal suffering. From where I sat, I could see the entrance of Greater Hope Baptist Church. The last guests hurried inside. The doors closed again. Moments later, the organ began to play. The ceremony had started, without me. My son was getting married, and I was outside, discarded like trash. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. The envelope was still there, intact. I pulled it out and looked at it under the afternoon light. Ownership certificate bearing Marcus's name. Purchase contract. Paid insurance policy for the first year. Inside, a smaller envelope with the keys. Shiny, unused. 21,500 euros. 60 months of saving. 1,820 days of denying myself small comforts, all reduced to pieces of paper trembling in my wrinkled hands. For a moment I wanted to tear them apart, throw them away, burn the proof of my stupidity. But something stopped me. I tucked the documents back into my pocket and closed my eyes. The tears finally came, Hot, silent, humiliating tears. I cried for Denise, who wasn't there to soften this moment. I cried for the son I thought I had. I cried for myself, for believing sacrifice could earn love. The organ music grew louder. I recognized the wedding march. Patrice was probably walking down the aisle now, guests rising to their feet. Marcus would be waiting at the altar, smiling, free of the embarrassment my presence represented. I clenched my eyes shut, trying not to imagine what I was missing, but my mind betrayed me. White flowers decorating the pews, candles glowing softly on polished faces, Reverend Michael Rivers in his ceremonial robe, Patrice reaching the altar, Marcus taking her hand while I sat crying on a dirty sidewalk. Time dragged on painfully. I heard fragments of the ceremony through the heavy wooden doors. Prayers, hymns, the muffled hum of voices. Each sound pierced my chest. My thoughts replayed the past months, searching for signs I should have seen. The July conversation when Marcus mentioned Patrice cared about keeping up appearances. I thought he meant etiquette, not me. The August call suggesting I refresh my wardrobe. I said I would, but I chose instead to pay off the car's last installments. I remembered the engagement dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown in March 2023. I sat at the far end of the table beside distant cousins of Patrice who ignored me completely. Marcus was busy all night giving toasts and collecting congratulations. He greeted me briefly at the start and again at the end. Nothing more. Then last Christmas, I had gone to his apartment with a modest gift, a book on business management I thought he'd enjoy. Patrice opened the door in stylish gym clothes, surprised to see me. Marcus appeared behind her, visibly irritated. He took the wrapped gift, muttered a rushed thanks, and sent me away saying they had plans. The signs had always been there. I just refused to see them because admitting them meant accepting that I'd lost my son long before today, that all my sacrifices had been for nothing, that Marcus saw me not as a father, but as a financial inconvenience. My phone vibrated. A message from Jerome. "Andre, where are you? This is awful. We need to talk afterward." I didn't reply. What could I say? I put the phone away and looked back at the church. Part of me wanted to walk away, to keep what little dignity I had left. Another, more masochistic part needed to stay, to be close, even if it meant sitting outside, listening to the echoes of a celebration I was excluded from. I thought of Denise. What would she have said if she could see me now? She'd probably scold me for not being stricter with Marcus, for spoiling him, for not teaching him the value of respect. Or maybe she'd just hold me and say it wasn't my fault, that sometimes children choose their own path, no matter how much love you give. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier by the minute. 21,500 euros I could have used to fix my apartment, buy decent clothes, or live more comfortably in my old age. Instead, I had spent it on a son who thought I was a beggar, unworthy of standing at his wedding. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I pulled the envelope out again and held it in the sunlight. The manila paper glowed faintly. Inside was the solution to many of Marcus's problems. A new car meant independence, comfort, status, the very things he valued above family ties. But sitting on that bench, humiliated and rejected, something shifted inside me. It wasn't hatred exactly. It was colder, clearer. It was understanding. I stayed there for half an hour, listening to the muffled sounds of the ceremony. The clarity grew with every passing minute. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was realization. I had been a fool for too long. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jerome. He answered on the second ring, whispering, "Andre, thank God. Are you okay? What Marcus did was unforgivable." "Jerome, I need a favor," I said calmly. "Can you step outside for a moment?" "The ceremony isn't over yet. Reverend Rivers is still speaking. Give me 5 minutes and I'll find an excuse." I hung up and waited. True to his word, 5 minutes later, I saw Jerome exit through a side door, walking quickly toward me, his face full of anger and worry. "This is outrageous," he said as soon as he reached me. "How could he treat you like that? Half the church is whispering about it. People are uncomfortable. Jerome, listen, I said firmly. I need your help, and we don't have much time. He sat beside me, giving his full attention. I explained my plan. At first he looked shocked, then confused, and finally, understanding. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Once you do it, there's no turning back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He nodded slowly. Then count me in. What exactly do you need? I gave him the details. Jerome listened carefully, asking questions to make sure he understood. When I finished, he gripped my shoulder. There's a side door they use to bring in flowers and cleaning supplies, he said. It leads right behind the organ, left side of the altar. Simple latch from the inside. I can make sure it stays open when everyone's distracted. How long until the vows? I asked. He checked his watch. The sermon's halfway done, then come 3 readings, the ring exchange, and finally the vows. 30, maybe 40 minutes. Perfect, I said. That gives me time to make an important call. Jerome returned inside after a final reassuring nod. I watched him disappear through the same side door that would soon become my entrance. Then I walked toward a nearby plaza where there were fewer people. I needed privacy for what I was about to do. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for the dealership where I'd bought the Mercedes. I dialed and waited. A woman's voice answered brightly. Good afternoon, Linden Auto House. How may I help you? Good afternoon, I said. I need to speak with Mr. Carl Linden, please. This is Andre Williams. One moment, sir. Soft hold music played for nearly 2 minutes before a familiar male voice came on. Mr. Williams, what a surprise. Everything all right? The car should be ready for pickup Monday morning as agreed. Mr. Linden, I said, I need to cancel the purchase. There was a long pause. Cancel? But sir, we've processed all the paperwork. The vehicle's registered under your son's name, plates installed. I understand and I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll pay any penalty required, but I need the transaction canceled immediately. Another pause. Papers rustled on his end. You paid in full, so there's no loan to cancel. According to our terms, canceling before pickup allows us to retain 10% as an administrative fee, €2,150. I accept. Please process the refund today. Today is Saturday, sir. Banks are closed. The earliest would be Monday morning. I can, however, send written confirmation that the sale's been canceled. That will do. Can you email it to me within an hour? Yes, Mr. Williams. You'll receive the cancellation certificate within 30 minutes. The refund, $19,350, will be processed Monday, October 1st. Thank you. I hung up, feeling strangely free. $21,500 minus the fee, $19,350 returning to my account. Money I would finally use for myself, to repair my life, to live with dignity again. I check my email every few minutes. At 5:15, the message from Linden Auto House arrived with a PDF attached, official confirmation of cancellation. I downloaded it and saved it both to my phone and to the cloud. I now had everything I needed, the original documents in my pocket, the cancellation proof in my phone, and a growing resolve that hardened with every heartbeat. At 5:30, I walked back toward Greater Hope Baptist Church. Jerome had estimated the vows would start around 5:45. I had 15 minutes to position myself. I circled the church until I found the side door he'd mentioned. It was slightly ajar, just as promised. I pushed it open and slipped inside. Inside, the air was dim and heavy with candle wax and old wood. I found myself in a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of incense and thyme. From somewhere ahead came the low, rhythmic voice of Reverend Rivers, still preaching the final reading. I moved quietly down the passage, following the sound until I reached a small antechamber behind the organ. Through the heavy curtain in front of me, I could see the altar clearly. Marcus stood there, his back to me, tall and confident, one hand holding Patrice's. The light from the chandeliers reflected off her veil, making her glow like a statue of porcelain. Around them, 300 guests filled the pews, all faces turned forward in solemn attention. I waited, motionless. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. but my mind was calm, colder than it had ever been. The moment I had spent hours preparing for was now minutes away. The Reverend concluded the last reading and gave a brief pause. Then his deep voice filled the church again, rich and ceremonial. "Let us now proceed with the exchange of rings." The guests shifted slightly. There was a gentle rustle of fabric and whispers as the ring-bearer stepped forward. Marcus and Patrice smiled at each other. Their hands trembled with emotion as the gold bands were blessed and exchanged. The crowd sighed softly, the kind of collective murmur that follows moments of tenderness. Then came the vow. The Reverend opened his book and read in a clear, resonant tone, "Marcus Williams, do you take Patrice Sutton to be your lawfully wedded wife? To love and to cherish her in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" Marcus took a deep breath, ready to speak the words that would seal their marriage. His mouth opened, but before a sound escaped, my voice echoed from the shadows behind the organ. "Wait," I said. "I have something to say before you continue." The effect was instantaneous. Every head in the church turned toward me at once. The organist froze mid-note. The Reverend stood motionless, mouth slightly open. Patrice gasped. And Marcus went pale as death, like a man seeing a ghost. I stepped out from behind the curtain and into the center aisle. The click of my old shoes against the marble floor echoed sharply through the silence. Step by step, I walked forward, never taking my eyes off my son. I could see him shaking. His lips moved soundlessly, disbelief spreading across his face. "What are you doing here?" he hissed when I was close enough to hear. "I told you to leave. I'll call security again." "Go ahead," I said evenly. My own voice startled me. It was calm, steady, almost detached. "But before you do, these 300 people are going to hear what I have to say." Patrice clutched Marcus's arm. "Marcus, please do something. This is humiliating." "Humiliating?" I repeated, looking directly at her. "Let's talk about humiliation, Patrice." I turned to face the guests. All eyes were on me. Curiosity, discomfort, fascination, every emotion reflected in that sea of faces. In the fifth row, I saw Jerome. His expression was unwavering, full of silent support. "My name is Andre Williams," I said, my voice rising naturally, carrying through the acoustics of the church. "I am Marcus's father. Exactly 2 hours ago, I was thrown out of this church because my son thought my shoes weren't good enough for his wedding. He called me a beggar in front of everyone in the atrium." A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience. Several people who had witnessed the confrontation nodded quietly, confirming my words. "I sat outside on that bench across the street," I continued, "listening to the ceremony through those doors, listening to my only son marry without me there. And while I sat, I held this." I pulled the manila envelope from my jacket and lifted it high for all to see. The room went even quieter, if that were possible. "Inside this envelope," I said, "are the documents for Mercedes C-Class, year 2024, fully paid for, bought as a wedding gift for Marcus. Value, 21,500 euros, paid in full by me." Gasps and whispers filled the air. Patrice looked at Marcus in confusion. He shook his head as if by denying it he could erase the truth. "For 5 years," I continued, "I saved 300 euros every month. I stopped eating meat. I canceled my internet. I walked 40 minutes to work every day to save subway fare. I froze in winter because I couldn't afford to heat my apartment. All for this, so my son could have a car of his own." I stepped closer to Marcus and held out the envelope. He stared at the papers inside, eyes widening as he recognized his own name on the ownership certificate. "I plan to announce it at the reception," I said, my voice trembling for the first time. I imagined his surprise, his joy. I imagined, for once, he'd look at me with pride instead of shame. Then I took a deep breath and began tearing the documents in half. The sound was sharp, echoing through the church like thunder. The first rip silenced every whisper. I tore again and again. Certificate, insurance, contract, all shredded into useless fragments. "No!" Marcus shouted, lunging forward, but I stepped back. "It's too late," I said. These documents are already void. I called the dealership an hour ago. The sale has been canceled. The last scraps fluttered to the floor like tragic confetti around his polished shoes. Marcus dropped to his knees, trying desperately to gather them, but the pieces were too many, too small, too broken. 21,500 euros, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the thick silence. 5 years of sacrifice, all because I loved my son and wanted to see him happy. I looked back at the guests. But that's not all you should know. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward the nearest rows so everyone could see. This wedding you're all enjoying, these flowers, that food, the band waiting at the reception, didn't come only from Patrice's family, as Marcus led you to believe. I contributed 15,000 euros myself. Gasps rose again. Patrice turned toward Marcus, eyes wide. You told me your parents didn't pay a cent. Patrice, wait, I can explain. 15,000, I said, overriding him. Paid in 6 monthly installments because I didn't have it all at once. 5,000 for catering, 3,500 for flowers and decoration, 2,000 for the band, 1,800 for the photographer, 800 for the cake, 900 for the special tableware, 400 for the invitations you're all holding in your hands right now. Every amount matched the receipts saved in my folder. Every number drove another nail into Marcus's false image. Faces turned toward him, some shocked, some disgusted, a few openly pitying. Patrice's father, Edward Sutton, leaned forward in his pew, his jaw tightening. I documented everything, I said. Every receipt, every payment. Would you like to see the invoices? I have them all. Mr. Williams, Reverend Rivers finally spoke, lifting a hand as if to calm me. I understand your anger, but perhaps this isn't the right. With all respect, Reverend, I interrupted, this is exactly the right place and the right tempo. These people deserve to know the truth before they witness this marriage. I turned back to Marcus. He stood frozen, face drained of color, eyes darting helplessly between me, Patrice, and the Reverend. The weight of the crowd's judgment pressed down on him like a physical force. But that's still not everything, I said. There's more my son has never told anyone, not even his fiancée. Marcus closed his eyes, as if bracing for impact. Patrice's hand trembled in hers. Since Marcus graduated in 2017, I said slowly, I have paid his private health insurance 400 euros every month for 7 straight years. 84 consecutive payments. A low wave of astonishment moved through the audience. That's 33,600 euros in total, I announced. All so my son could have the best doctors, quick treatments, private hospitals, because after watching my wife suffer in waiting lists, I swore Marcus would never go through that. Patrice's mother, an elegant woman in a blue suit, stood up suddenly. Patrice, did you know about this? No, Patrice said in a trembling voice. Marcus told me he paid for his own insurance. He even showed me statements from his account. Because I transferred the money to his account each month, I explained. He used it to make the payments, letting everyone believe it was his. A comfortable lie that made him look independent and responsible. That was the breaking point. Marcus exploded. Enough, he shouted, his voice cracking. Yes, you helped me financially. So what? That's what fathers are supposed to do. You can't come here and ruin my wedding because you're offended over some stupid shoes. Some stupid shoes, I repeated softly, the words chilling even to me. You called me a beggar, Marcus. You had me dragged out by guards in front of 300 people. You erased me from your life because you were ashamed of how I looked, not who I am. He threw up his hands, shouting again. Because you showed up looking like a bum. This is my wedding, my day. Was it too much to ask that you look decent? I looked as decent as I could, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Because every cent I had went to you, to your car, to your wedding, to your medical insurance. There was nothing left for me. Silence fell so thick it seemed the air itself froze. Even the children who had been fidgeting were perfectly still. I could hear the sound of my own breath echoing against the church walls. Marcus stood there, trembling, his face red with rage and humiliation. Patrice had stepped away from him slightly. her hand no longer on his arm. The Reverend looked uncertain, torn between intervening and allowing the scene to play out. I took another step forward, stopping halfway down the aisle, close enough that Marcus could see every line etched into my face. "You know," I said softly, "when your mother was dying, she made me promise something. She said, 'Andre, whatever happens, make sure Marcus never forgets where he came from. Never let him be ashamed of his roots.'" Marcus's jaw clenched. His eyes flickered briefly, as though the mention of Denise had pierced through his fury for a heartbeat. Then he looked away, his voice shaking with anger. "Don't bring Mom into this." "I have to," I said, louder now, the emotion rising in my throat. "Because she's the only reason I didn't give up years ago. Everything I've done since she died, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, was because of her. Because she believed you would grow up to be a good man. And for a while, I believed it too. I could feel tears forming, but I didn't stop. When she was in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, she told me she was proud of you. She said you had your whole life ahead of you, that you'd make her proud. And I promised her I would help you do that. I promised her I'd support you until you didn't need me anymore." I reached into my jacket again and pulled out something small, a folded photo. I unfolded it carefully and held it up. It was Denise, smiling in the hospital bed, Marcus sitting beside her, holding her hand. "Do you remember this day?" I asked him. "It was the last time your mother ever smiled. She smiled because you told her you'd make her proud." Marcus looked at the photo, and for the first time his expression faltered. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "I believed in that promise," I continued. "Even when you stopped calling, even when you ignored my messages, even when you only showed up at Christmas to take your gifts and leave before dessert, I thought maybe one day you'd remember who raised you, who worked 16-hour days so you could study, who skipped meals so you could eat better, who pawned his wedding ring to pay your tuition." The guests were silent now. No whispers, no murmurs. You could have heard a pin drop. Some of them were visibly emotional. I noticed an older woman in the second row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Marcus," I said. "I came to celebrate you, to see the boy your mother and I raised become a man. But instead, I found a stranger, a man who thinks love is measured by appearances, by how expensive a suit is, by the shine of a shoe, a man who's forgotten that respect is worth more than money." Patrice turned slowly toward him, her voice trembling. "Marcus, is this true? You said your father didn't support you, that he was distant and cold, that he never cared." Marcus rubbed his forehead with shaking fingers. "Patrice, please, it's complicated." "No," she said sharply, her voice rising. "It's not complicated. It's simple. Your father sacrificed everything for you, and you treated him like garbage. How could you?" "I was trying to protect you," he blurted out. "You don't understand how people judge." "Judge?" Patrice snapped, cutting him off. "You humiliated your own father because you were afraid of what people would think of his shoes? Marcus, that's not judgment. That's vanity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some of Patrice's relatives were whispering angrily among themselves. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. I saw Edward Sutton, Patrice's father, stand up and smooth his suit, clearly deciding to intervene. "Mr. Williams," he said politely, addressing me, "I understand your pain, but perhaps this moment can still be salvaged. My daughter doesn't deserve to have her wedding ruined by family disputes." I turned toward him, nodding. "You're right, Mr. Sutton. Your daughter doesn't deserve this, and I'm truly sorry for what she's witnessing. But this isn't about her. It's about the man she's about to marry, the man who thought his father's love was an embarrassment." Patrice looked at her father, then back at Marcus. "Dad, he's right. If this is how Marcus treats the people who love him, what makes you think he'll treat me any better?" Edward Sutton didn't answer. He simply looked at Marcus, his expression hardening into quiet disappointment. Marcus finally snapped. "Enough! All of you, stop judging me. You don't know what it's like to grow up with nothing, to feel like you're always behind everyone else. I just wanted a better life. I wanted to prove I belonged here." "You could have had both," I said gently. Success doesn't have to mean shame. You could have been proud of where you came from. Proud of me. Proud of your mother. Proud of yourself. For a few seconds he said nothing. His breathing was ragged. His eyes glistened with something. Anger, guilt, confusion. Maybe all of it at once. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You ruined everything." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." I turned to the Reverend and bowed my head slightly. "Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll leave now." The Reverend hesitated, then nodded gravely. I started walking down the aisle toward the exit. No one stopped me. As I passed each row, people stepped aside. Some lowered their heads in respect. Others stared, speechless. When I reached the doors, Jerome was there, waiting for me. He had tears in his eyes. "Andre," he said softly, "that was powerful." I sighed. "It wasn't supposed to be." He put a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do." I nodded, but the pain in my chest was unbearable. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, the heavy doors of the church closed behind me again, just as they had earlier. But this time the sound didn't echo like rejection. It sounded like closure. Outside, the street was bathed in golden light from the setting sun. For a moment I just stood there, breathing, feeling the weight of everything lifting, slowly, painfully, but lifting nonetheless. Jerome followed me out. "Where will you go now?" he asked. I shrugged. "Home, I guess. I've got 19,000 euros coming back to me next week. Maybe I'll finally fix the heating. Maybe buy a decent pair of shoes." He smiled faintly. "You should. You've earned it." We started walking toward the train station. Behind us, the church bells began to ring again, signaling the ceremony's abrupt end. I imagined the chaos inside, the whispers, the embarrassment, the explanations Marcus would have to give. But that was no longer my concern. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about me. At the corner of 63rd Street, I stopped and turned back for one last look. The church stood there against the darkening sky, solemn and silent. Somewhere inside, my son was facing the consequences of his choices. I whispered under my breath, "Goodbye, Marcus." Then I turned and walked away. But as I reached the station, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it. "Mr. Williams, this is Reverend Rivers. After you left, Marcus collapsed at the altar. He's conscious now, but he's asking for you. Please come back if you can." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart pounding. The train pulled into the station, its doors sliding open with a hiss. I could step on and leave everything behind, or I could turn back. I closed my eyes, hearing Denise's voice in my head. Never let him forget where he came from. The doors beeped, signaling their final warning. I took one slow breath, turned around, and started walking back toward the church. When I reached the church again, the bells had stopped ringing, and the crowd was thinning out. The sunlight had faded into the deep amber of early evening, and the tall windows glowed faintly from the inside. A few guests lingered outside, talking in hushed voices. Their faces carried the kind of discomfort people wear when they've witnessed something private, something they'll gossip about later, but never truly understand. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The scent of candles and wilted flowers hit me at once. Inside, the church was quieter now. The organ was silent, the decorations slightly wilted under the weight of the day. At the front, I saw Reverend Rivers standing near the altar, talking quietly with Patrice's parents. Patrice herself was sitting in the first pew, her hands covering her face. Then I saw Marcus. He was sitting on the floor near the altar steps, his back against the wall, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his hair slightly disheveled. A bottle of water lay beside him, half empty. His face looked pale, drained of the arrogance and pride that had once filled it. When his eyes met mine, he didn't look angry or defiant anymore. He just looked lost. "Dad," he whispered. I walked slowly down the aisle, the echo of my shoes returning to the same path I had taken earlier, though now the air felt different, thicker, heavier with remorse. Patrice lifted her head as I approached. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red from crying. "Mr. Williams," she said softly, "thank you for coming back. He passed out right after you left. He hasn't said much since." I nodded, saying nothing, and knelt down beside Marcus. Up close, I could see how much the tears had swollen his eyes. His breathing was uneven, his voice trembling when he spoke. "Dad, I don't even know what to say," he murmured. "You don't need to say anything right now," I said quietly. "Just breathe." He looked down, his hands shaking. What I did out there, I don't even understand why. It's like I turned into someone else. I wanted everything to be perfect, but all I did was destroy everything." "You didn't destroy everything," I said, "but you hurt a lot of people, including yourself." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Patrice's parents want to call off the wedding. Her father said he's ashamed. I don't blame him. I'm ashamed too." Patrice turned slightly toward him, her expression softening. "Marcus, this isn't about shame. It's about seeing who you really are. Maybe it's not too late to change that." Marcus looked at her, his voice breaking. "Would you still want to marry me after what I did?" She hesitated for a moment, then shook her head gently. "Not today," she said, "but maybe one day, if you prove you're not the man who humiliated his own father." Her words were calm, but they landed like a quiet verdict. Marcus's shoulders slumped. He nodded slowly, as if accepting the sentence. Reverend Rivers stepped closer, resting a kind hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Son, pride is a heavy cross to carry," he said softly, "but humility can save even the hardest heart. The good Lord gives second chances, but only to those who seek them sincerely." Marcus didn't answer. His eyes turned back to me, pleading silently for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. I wasn't sure which. "I thought I was doing everything right," he said. "I thought success meant leaving behind everything that reminded me of struggle. I didn't want people to look at me and see poverty." I sighed. "Marcus, there's no shame in where you came from. There's only shame in forgetting it." He nodded weakly. "I know that now. I wish I'd realized it before today." Patrice stood up slowly. "Reverend, could we have a moment alone?" The Reverend nodded and guided her parents toward the side exit. As they left, the church grew still again, the faint hum of traffic outside the only sound breaking the silence. Marcus and I sat there together, side by side on the steps of the altar. The same altar where, only an hour ago, he had stood proudly before the world, ready to start a new life. Now he looked like a child again, broken, small, unsure. "Dad," he said finally, "I saw you tearing those papers. I saw everything falling apart, and I realized I didn't deserve any of it. You worked so hard for me, and all I did was throw it in your face." I looked at him carefully. "You can't change what's been done, Marcus, but you can decide what happens next." He nodded slowly. "What happens next?" I leaned back against the pew and exhaled deeply. "You start over. You apologize. You make things right with Patrice, with her family, and with yourself. And then maybe, someday, you'll make peace with me too." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "Can you forgive me, Dad?" I paused. The word forgive hung heavy in the air. Forgiveness is simple to say, but never easy to give. I thought of Denise again, her smile, her faith in both of us. What would she want me to do? I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for once, Marcus. It's something you earn over time. But I'll tell you this, I don't hate you. I never did. I'm just tired of losing the people I love to pride." He nodded, crying openly now. "I'll make it up to you, I swear. I'll fix everything." I shook my head. "Don't fix it for me. Fix it for yourself. Because if you live long enough, you'll realize the only person you really betray by living a lie is you." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The church felt warmer somehow, as if the stillness had softened. Outside, the last rays of sunlight were fading into dusk. Patrice re-entered quietly, her expression uncertain. She stood at the aisle, hesitating. Marcus looked up, his eyes red and pleading. "Patrice, I don't expect forgiveness, but I promise I'll become the man I should have been. If not for us, then at least for me, and for my father." Patrice's lips quivered. She approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You broke something today," she said gently, "but maybe you can rebuild it. Just not with lies, Marcus, not with appearances." He nodded, unable to speak. She turned to me. "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry for what happened. No one should ever go through what you went through today." I smiled faintly. "You don't need to apologize for him. He's already doing that himself." Patrice gave me a small, respectful nod before walking toward the doors. As she reached the exit, she stopped, turned slightly, and said, "Take care of each other." Then she was gone. Marcus watched her leave, and for the first time since that morning, I saw humility in his face. Not forced, not superficial, but real, the kind that only comes after a fall. We stayed in the church long after everyone else had gone. The candles flickered low, their wax pooling in quiet rivers. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, healing. Finally, Marcus stood up and extended his hand toward me. "Come home with me, Dad," he said. "Let me make you dinner. I think it's time I took care of you for a change." I hesitated, then smiled. "All right, son, let's go home." As we walked out together, the night air wrapped around us like a cool blanket. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Marcus walked beside me, silent but steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. And maybe, just maybe, this time, we were finally walking in the same direction. Marcus drove us to his apartment in silence. The city lights rolled past the car windows like a film reel of memories, each block, each intersection reminding me of the years I had spent working, sacrificing, hoping for his future. I watched the reflection of his face in the window as he drove. The same eyes as Denise, but dimmer now, worn down by pride and regret. For once, he didn't try to fill the silence with words. He just drove, both of us wrapped in thoughts too heavy to share. When we reached his building, he parked in front of the entrance and turned off the engine. For a moment we sat there in the darkness, the hum of the cooling motor the only sound between us. Then he spoke quietly. "I sold the engagement ring." I turned to him, startled. "I bought it on credit," he said. "Patrice's ring. I told her it was from a family heirloom." Another lie. I don't even know who I was trying to impress anymore. I looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe it's time you stopped trying to impress anyone," I said softly. "Start learning to live with yourself instead." He nodded and got out. We climbed the stairs to his apartment on the 3rd floor. It was clean, modern, expensive-looking, far more than what a man his age could afford without help. I recognized pieces of furniture from high-end catalogs, the kind people buy when they want to prove something rather than use it. Marcus dropped his jacket on the couch, walked to the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. Inside were a few leftover takeout boxes, a bottle of wine, and some half-used condiments. "I told Patrice I could cook," he said bitterly, pulling out a carton of eggs. "Guess that was a lie, too." I smiled faintly. "Well, let's see what kind of lies we can make edible." He laughed, a small broken laugh, and handed me the eggs. We worked together in silence. I showed him how to cook simple scrambled eggs the way Denise used to make them, with a bit of butter and salt. The smell filled the room, warm and nostalgic. For the first time since morning, the silence between us wasn't cold. It was human. As we ate, Marcus looked around his apartment and sighed. "All this stuff," he said, "it doesn't mean anything anymore. Not the couch, not the TV, not even the watch on my wrist. I thought having these things would make me someone, but they just made me forget who I already was." "That's how emptiness works," I said. "It hides behind things that shine." He nodded slowly. "You know what's crazy? I used to envy the rich families Patrice came from. Her dad always walked into a room like he owned it. And I thought, if I can just get to that level, I'll be respected too. But now, after today, I'd trade everything for one moment of Mom's pride." "She was proud of you," I said quietly. She just didn't imagine you'd take such a long road to see it. He smiled faintly, looking down at his plate. You sound like her. I should. I listened to her enough. For a while, we just ate in peace. The city outside buzzed softly, car horns, distant laughter, the hum of life continuing. I felt the tension in my shoulders loosen for the first time in years. Marcus seemed smaller now, humbled, almost childlike. When the plates were empty, he stood and began to clean up. He didn't say anything, but his movements were deliberate, thoughtful, a small act of penance. I leaned back in my chair, watching him rinse the dishes, dry them carefully, and place them back where they belonged. When he turned around, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. The quiet guilt of a boy who knows he's disappointed his father and wants to make it right. I've been thinking, he said, about the money for the wedding, the insurance, the car. I want to pay you back, every cent. I shook my head. You can't pay back love, Marcus. It doesn't work like a loan. But I need to try, he insisted. I need to do something. I can't live knowing I used you. I looked him straight in the eye. Then don't pay me back with money. Pay me back by becoming the kind of man your mother would recognize. He swallowed hard and nodded. I will. He walked to his small bookshelf and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were a few €100, probably what was left from his savings. He placed it on the table. This is for you, he said. I don't want your money. It's not about money, he said. It's about starting over. You've given me everything, Dad. Let me give something back, even if it's small. I looked at him for a long time before taking the envelope and setting it aside. You start over by forgiving yourself, I said. That's harder than paying debts. Marcus sat down again, elbows on his knees, his head hanging low. I don't know if I can forgive myself. You can, I said softly. If I can still look at you and see my son, then you can look in the mirror and try to see the man you want to be. He rubbed his face with both hands. You make it sound easy. It's not, but it's worth it. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Midnight was approaching. The weight of exhaustion began to settle in, not just physical tiredness, but the emotional fatigue of a long, painful day. I should go, I said, standing up. Marcus looked alarmed. No, please, stay the night. I'll drive you home in the morning. I hesitated, then nodded. All right. He prepared the couch for me, bringing a clean blanket and pillow. As he did, I noticed how carefully he tucked in the corners, small gestures that spoke louder than apologies. Before turning in, he paused at the hallway. Dad, I'm sorry for everything. I nodded. I know. He stood there a moment longer, as if wanting to say more, then disappeared into his room. I lay down on the couch, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the ache of loneliness pressing against me. The apartment smelled faintly of butter and old coffee. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. I thought of Denise again. I could almost hear her whisper, You did what you had to do. Maybe she was right. Maybe the only way Marcus could learn was to fall apart in front of everyone, to lose everything built on lies before he could rebuild something honest. Sleep came slowly but deeply. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the blinds. Marcus was already up, sitting by the window with a mug of coffee in his hand. He turned when he heard me stir. Morning, he said quietly. There's breakfast. Toast and fruit. It's not much, but it's something. More than enough, I said, stretching. He poured me a cup of coffee, black and strong, the way I used to drink it when he was a child. We sat at the small table again, eating in silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't guilt or shame. It was peace. After breakfast, I stood to leave. Marcus followed me to the door. Dad, he said, I've got a lot to fix, but thank you for not giving up on me. I smiled faintly. You're my son. I don't know how to do anything else. He looked like he wanted to hug me, but hesitated, so I took the step for him. I pulled him into a tight embrace, feeling his shoulders shake. For a moment, I could almost feel Denise between us, her warmth, her forgiveness, her hope. When we finally let go, I patted his shoulder. Take care of yourself, Marcus. I will, Dad. I promise. I stepped outside into the morning air. The street was alive again. Buses passing, people walking dogs, kids laughing on their way to school. The world had moved on, as it always does. But something inside me felt lighter. I started walking home, each step steady, sure, and for the first time in years, I felt like a father again. Not because I had given, but because I had finally been heard. I walked home slowly, my steps heavy but steady. The morning breeze brushed against my face as if the city itself were breathing again after a long night of holding its breath. The streets were waking up, cafes opening their doors, buses rumbling past, the smell of coffee and bread drifting from corner bakeries. It felt like a new beginning, though I didn't quite know for whom, for Marcus, for me, or for both of us. When I reached my apartment, the quiet was overwhelming. The same worn-out armchair by the window, the same framed photo of Denise on the shelf, her soft smile frozen in time. For years, this place had felt like a tomb, too small, too silent, too filled with memories. But that morning, for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel empty. It felt alive with something fragile, something like forgiveness waiting to take root. I made myself some tea and sat by the window. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Dad, I know words don't fix anything, but I'm going to try anyway. I love you. I'll come by tomorrow after work if that's okay. I smiled. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had in years. I typed back. Tomorrow's fine. I'll make dinner. Something simple. Love you too. I set the phone down and exhaled deeply. For a long time, I just sat there, staring out at the skyline. The sun was climbing higher now, painting the buildings in gold. Life, I thought, has a way of breaking you in the exact places you've built the thickest walls. Maybe it has to. Maybe that's how light gets in. Later that day, I opened the envelope with the dealership documents, what remained of them after being torn apart. I had saved a few scraps as a reminder. I placed them in a small wooden box with Denise's photo and the wedding invitation Marcus had sent me months ago. They were symbols of love, disappointment, and rebirth all at once. The next morning came with the knock of the mail carrier at my door. Mr. Williams, he said, handing me a certified envelope. Inside was the refund notice from Linden Auto House, confirmation of the canceled purchase, the remaining 19,350 euros, soon to be transferred to my account. I held the letter for a while, feeling both relief and sadness. That money had been meant for Marcus, but maybe, in a strange way, it still was. Not as a car, but as something greater, a second chance. I didn't touch the money right away. I let it sit in my account, untouched, like a seed waiting for the right soil. In the days that followed, I began to clean the apartment, really clean it for the first time in years. I sorted through old boxes, threw away papers I no longer needed, and kept only the things that mattered. Denise's books, our wedding photo, the small ceramic bird she loved. On Wednesday evening, Marcus came over. He looked different, tired but lighter somehow. He carried a paper bag filled with groceries. I figured we could cook together again, he said. I smiled. All right, chef. We made pasta and talked about small things. His work, the neighbors, even the weather. It wasn't forced, it just flowed. When the food was ready, we ate in silence for a bit, and then he said, I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately, about what she'd say if she saw us now. I nodded. She'd probably smile and say, It's about time. He laughed quietly. Yeah, she would. After dinner, Marcus pulled out an envelope from his jacket and handed it to me. Inside was a printed job offer. It's a position with a nonprofit, he said. They help families in need with financial planning, budgeting, saving, that kind of thing. It doesn't pay much, but it feels right. I start next month. I looked at him, surprised. That's a big change, he nodded. I want to do something that means something, something that isn't about appearances. I couldn't help but smile. Your mother would be proud. He lowered his eyes. I hope so. And I hope one day you'll be proud too. I already am. We sat there for a long time after that, saying nothing, just sharing the quiet, like old friends rediscovering a language they'd forgotten. It was strange, the peace that came not from solving everything, but simply from accepting what was broken and choosing to rebuild anyway. A few weeks later, the refund finally arrived in my account. I transferred half of it to a savings fund under both our names. The Denise Foundation, I called it. It wasn't a legal foundation, just a small account meant to help families like ours had been, those drowning in hospital bills, those trying to hold on to hope. When I told Marcus about it, he cried. Months passed. The leaves turned golden, then fell. Marcus visited every weekend, sometimes helping with groceries, sometimes just sitting with me in silence. He apologized less and listened more. He talked about the people he was helping at his new job, single mothers, retired veterans, families trying to escape debt. They remind me of us, he said once, except now I get to help them before they make the same mistakes I did. Life didn't turn perfect. It never does. There were still days when the loneliness crept in, when I reached for the phone to call Denise before remembering she was gone. But now, when I looked at her picture, I didn't just see loss. I saw legacy. I saw the thread that still connected us. Through Marcus, through love, through forgiveness. One evening in late spring, Marcus came by unexpectedly. He had a smile I hadn't seen in years. Genuine, unguarded. "Dad," he said, "I wanted to show you something." He led me outside to the parking lot. Parked there was an old Volkswagen Passat, silver gray, a bit worn, but clean. "It's not a Mercedes," he said with a grin, "but I paid for it myself. Every cent. No loans, no help." I felt my throat tighten. "She runs?" "Like a dream," he said. "Want to take her for a spin?" We drove through the quiet streets as the evening settled in. The car smelled faintly of new upholstery and hope. Marcus turned on the radio, and for a moment, we just listened. Old soul music, the kind Denise loved. As we crossed the bridge over the river, the city lights reflected on the water like a trail of memories stretching behind us. Marcus glanced at me and said, "You know, Dad, I finally get it. The car, the shoes, the suit, none of that mattered. You just wanted me to remember who I am." I looked out at the skyline and nodded. "You always were my son, Marcus. You just had to remember it yourself." We drove in silence after that, both of us smiling softly. The wind rushed through the half-open windows, carrying away the last traces of bitterness. The city stretched ahead, wide, open, alive with possibility. And for the first time, I knew that Denise was somewhere smiling too. As spring turned into early summer, life began to take on a new rhythm. Calm, measured, free of the old weight that had once pressed against my chest. I had spent so many years living for Marcus that I'd forgotten what it meant to simply live. Now, I woke up with no dread, no bitterness, no endless to-do list of sacrifices to make. My mornings started with coffee on the balcony, the sound of birds rather than the hum of factory machinery or city traffic. Marcus kept his word. He visited almost every weekend, each time with a new story from his job at the nonprofit. The first month he told me about a single mother of 3 whose credit was ruined after her husband walked out. He'd helped her set up a small savings plan, guiding her step by step until she cried with relief. The next week he mentioned an elderly couple who had been paying insurance premiums they didn't need. He sorted through their papers and saved them hundreds of dollars. "It's strange, Dad," he said once. "All these people think I'm helping them, but really, they're helping me. Every time I talk to someone who's lost everything, I remember where I was that day at the church. It keeps me grounded." I saw it in his eyes, the change Denise had always prayed for. He was no longer the son who measured worth by the cost of his shoes or the shine of his watch. He was learning the quiet dignity of doing right, not for applause, but for peace. By July, Marcus had been promoted to project coordinator. It wasn't a big title, but it meant responsibility, something he hadn't handled well in the past. He invited me to an open house event his organization was hosting downtown. I hadn't attended anything social in years, but I went, partly to support him, partly to see for myself what kind of man he was becoming. The event took place in a refurbished community center. Bright walls, folding chairs, the smell of coffee and old wood polish. Families filled the room, children laughing while volunteers handed out pamphlets. And there, standing by a small podium, was Marcus, wearing a simple white shirt and dark trousers. No flashy suit, no gold cufflinks, no mask, just himself. When he noticed me enter, his face lit up. "That's my dad," he told the man beside him, pride clear in his voice. The words hit me harder than I expected. It had been years since he'd said them with that tone. After the speeches, he introduced me to his co-workers. "This is Mr. Williams," he said, "the man who taught me everything about hard work and patience." The team laughed politely, but I could tell they sensed his sincerity. Later, as we stood near the door, Marcus handed me a flyer for a new program they were launching, a scholarship fund for students from low-income families. "We're naming it after Mom," he said quietly, "the Denise Williams Hope Initiative. She always wanted to help people become independent. Now she'll keep doing that. Through us." I felt the sting of tears in my eyes, but managed to nod. "She'd love that," I said. That night, back home, I sat at my table and thought about how far we had come. From the humiliation outside the church to this moment of quiet redemption. Pain had been the fire that burned away everything false between us, leaving only the truth. A few weeks later, Marcus called again. "Dad," he said, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." I chuckled. "Already moving on, huh?" "It's not like that," he said quickly. "Her name's Alicia. She works at the center, too. We're just taking things slow." When they came by the following Sunday, I saw what he meant. Alicia was kind-eyed, warm, and real. She brought peach cobbler and laughed easily. The kind of laughter that fills a room without demanding attention. I liked her immediately. She wasn't dressed to impress, just jeans, a simple blouse, and a smile that felt honest. While Marcus brewed coffee, she sat across from me and said, "He talks about you a lot, about everything you've been through together." I smiled faintly. "He exaggerates, I'm sure." "No," she said softly. "He admires you. He said you're the reason he's trying to be a better man." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I looked toward the kitchen where Marcus was humming an old gospel tune Denise used to love. And for the first time, I let myself believe it, that maybe all the years of sacrifice, all the pain, had finally meant something. The three of us ate lunch together. Alicia talked about her plans to expand the organization's outreach programs, Marcus about his budget challenges, me about the garden I'd started on my balcony. It was simple, ordinary, and that's what made it beautiful. When they left that afternoon, Alicia hugged me. "You raised a good man," she said. I smiled. It just took him a while to realize it. After they drove off, I went to the window and watched the sunset pour over the rooftops. The world looked softer, almost merciful. The ache in my chest that had once felt permanent was gone, replaced by quiet gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Marcus called often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to ask for advice about work or life. He still stumbled now and then, moments of doubt, flashes of the old arrogance, but each time he caught himself. He was learning, and I was learning too, learning how to live without defining myself by what I'd given up. I used some of the refund money to travel, just short trips, New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston. I walked streets filled with history, listened to jazz drifting through open doors, talked with strangers at cafes. Life, I realized, wasn't over at 69. It was only quieter, wiser, and more deliberate. When I returned from Savannah one evening, there was a letter waiting in my mailbox. The envelope had Marcus's handwriting on it. Inside was a photo, him, Alicia, and a group of children holding small certificates. On the back he'd written, "The Denise Williams Hope Initiative, our first 10 scholarships. Thank you, Dad, for teaching me what love really looks like. I held that photo for a long time, my fingers trembling. Then I placed it next to Denise's picture on the shelf. They looked right together, the past and the present, side by side. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the balcony, and let the summer air wash over me. Somewhere in the distance, music floated from a neighbor's window, an old soul song, warm and familiar. I closed my eyes and smiled. There were still regrets, of course. Life always leaves scars. But the pain that once defined me had turned into something else. Wisdom, perhaps, or maybe just peace. Marcus had found his way back, not because I forced him, but because I finally let him fall. And as the night deepened and the stars blinked awake above the city, I realized something simple and true. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the wound. It's about refusing to let it own you anymore. Winter came softly that year, without drama or thunder, just the quiet drift of cold air through the city, the kind that makes people walk a little faster and hold their coats a little tighter. I was sitting in my living room one evening, a mug of tea steaming in my hands, when the phone rang. The number was familiar. "Hey, Dad." It was Marcus. His voice sounded steady, peaceful, not like the trembling guilt of the year before, but like a man who had learned to stand on his own feet. "Hey, son, how's the job?" He laughed. "Busy. The grant we applied for came through. We're expanding the Hope Initiative into 3 new neighborhoods. Alicia and I have been working nonstop." I smiled, proud without saying it out loud. "That's good to hear." "Also," he continued, hesitating just slightly, "we have news, big news." I leaned back in my chair. "Go on." "We're getting married." Nothing big this time, just a small ceremony at the community center. No suits, no limousines, no photographers. Just us, a few friends, and you, if you'll come. For a moment I couldn't speak. The memory of that other wedding, the humiliation, the pain, flashed across my mind like an old scar catching light. But this was different. The voice on the other end wasn't arrogant or defensive. It was humble, sincere. "I'll be there," I said finally. Marcus exhaled audibly, relief and emotion mixing in his tone. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." 2 weeks later, I stood inside the same community center where Marcus had once introduced me proudly as his father. The walls were lined with paper streamers, the smell of homemade food drifting from the kitchen. There were maybe 30 people in total, co-workers, volunteers, children from the scholarship program. No tuxedos, no expensive flowers, just warmth. Alicia looked radiant in a simple cream dress. Marcus wore a navy blue jacket, modest but well-fitted. When he saw me enter, he came forward and hugged me. Not a polite, hesitant hug, a real one. The kind that says, "We made it through." During the ceremony, as the pastor spoke about love built on honesty and humility, I felt Denise's presence more than ever. I could almost see her standing in the back, smiling, her eyes shining with quiet approval. Afterward, there was food and laughter, not the forced laughter of wealthy guests trying to outshine each other, but genuine joy. The children danced. People clapped along to the music. I sat at a small table, watching Marcus move through the crowd with ease, no longer pretending to be someone else. At one point, Alicia walked over and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "He's different now," she said. "I know," I replied. "He finally learned what real wealth looks like." She smiled and nodded toward Marcus. "You gave him that." Maybe I did. Or maybe I just stopped protecting him long enough for life to teach him itself. Later that evening, Marcus raised a toast. He stood in front of everyone, glass in hand, his voice clear and calm. "I want to thank my father," he began, "for showing me that love isn't measured in money or gifts, but in sacrifice and forgiveness. A year ago, I lost everything because I couldn't see that. Today, I stand here because he chose not to give up on me, even when he had every reason to." He looked at me directly. "Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor it." There was silence for a heartbeat, and then the room erupted in applause. I felt my eyes sting, but I didn't look away. I just raised my glass in return. After the celebration, Marcus and Alicia walked me to my car. The night air was crisp, the stars clear above the city skyline. He hugged me again, tighter this time. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. Always. He smiled, then opened the passenger door for Alicia. As they drove away, I watched the taillights disappear down the street, glowing like two small embers fading into the dark. When I returned home, the apartment felt different. Not empty, but peaceful. I poured myself a small drink and sat by the window, gazing out over the quiet streets. The reflection of the city lights shimmered faintly on the glass, and for the first time since Denise's death, I spoke out loud to her picture. You were right, sweetheart. He just needed time. The next morning I woke early. The sun rose slow and golden through the curtains. I brewed coffee, opened the balcony door, and breathed in the cold winter air. The city was alive again. Buses rumbling, birds calling faintly between the rooftops. I could hear laughter from children walking to school. I realized, with quiet satisfaction, that life had come full circle. The boy who had once called me a beggar had become a man who fed off the others. The father who had once been humiliated in front of hundreds now found pride not in revenge, but in forgiveness. The woman we had both lost had somehow brought us together again, not through tragedy, but through memory. In the following months, Marcus and Alicia moved into a modest apartment near the center where they worked. They visited often, sometimes with homemade dinners, sometimes just to sit and talk. Alicia started teaching financial literacy classes for teenagers, and Marcus began leading community outreach events. The Hope Initiative kept growing, touching lives neither of us could have imagined. One afternoon he showed up unexpectedly with an envelope. We got our first national grant, he said proudly, $200,000 for expansion. That's amazing, son, he smiled. We're naming the new branch the Denise Center. It'll focus on helping widows and single parents start small businesses. I was speechless. My wife's legacy, living on through the very man she had raised. In March, they invited me to the groundbreaking ceremony. The mayor was there, local reporters, even a few old co-workers from my maintenance job. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Marcus and said, I used to think life's greatest achievement was leaving something behind, but today I've learned it's not what you leave, it's who you raise. My wife raised a man who stumbled, fell, and rose again. That's her monument. The crowd applauded, but Marcus just looked down, fighting tears. After the event, as we walked through the construction site together, he said quietly, Dad, I used to think forgiveness meant erasing the past. Now I understand it means living better because of it. I nodded. Exactly. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the box where I kept out my old memories. The scraps of the torn car documents, Denise's photo, Marcus's letter from years ago. I added one more thing, a small card that said, The Denise Center, opening day. I closed the box gently. It no longer felt like a container of pain, but a time capsule of lessons. Now, when I wake each morning, I don't think about the past with bitterness. I think about what it built, resilience, clarity, love that has been tested and purified. At 69, I've learned the truth that took me a lifetime to understand. You can't save someone from their own pride, but you can love them through the fall. And when they rise again, you realize the fall was necessary, for both of you. The sun dips low outside my window, painting the horizon in wild and violet. I finish my coffee, put on my coat, and step out into the evening. The streets hum with life, and somewhere in the distance I can hear the faint laughter of children, maybe from the community center, maybe from fate itself. I walk slowly, each step steady, certain. The world feels kind again, and as the city lights flicker on one by one, I whisper a quiet prayer, not for wealth, not for success, but for peace. Because after all these years, I finally understand that peace is the rarest, richest gift a man can ever earn.